coming to you live from the San Francisco Bay Area. It's time for Zig in the Zone with Ralph Zig Tycho.
Hey, I'm Zig, and I'm in the zone. I've got my my partner, Paulie B, Paul Brumbaugh, with me, and a very special guest who is waiting in the green room and will be introduced momentarily. Paulie B, how the hell are you?
Well, you know, it's just another day, Zig, as I turn off my camera and don't turn on, or turn off your camera and don't turn on my camera. There we go. Good to see you, Zig. I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm just hanging out at Ed Studios. How are you doing today?
Hey, you couldn't be in a better place. I'm remote today in Alameda, California. You're in San Francisco, and I'm sure the weather is much like it is here. Delightful.
It's a beautiful day here in San Francisco. It's a beautiful day. My dog is laying here on the couch. Things are beautiful.
All right, say woof woof for me.
There you go. Woof woof to the big dog.
All right.
So tell us a little bit about our guest today.
Our guest is an author, and she just completed a book that our mutual friend, her and I, Mark Littell, started, didn't complete because of his tragic passing, and she made the book a book. So, H.R. Ryan, how the hell are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
We're both dressed like Met fans.
Yep.
And that's nice because we are. And just so happens the Mets are back on track. They had been floundering a little bit, and they're coming along. So that's nice to see.
Yeah.
It's also nice to see a woman who's a baseball fan. When I was a kid, it wasn't something that happened very often. They had Ladies' Day. They called them ladies at that time, until Disney did the thing with the lady and the dog. But I hate that expression, lady. You're not a lady, you're a woman. I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the world. As I generally do, I ramble on with shit. But we've covered the Batman stuff. Let's talk about Mark. When did you first acquaint yourself with him?
It was in the early part of 2022. He had posted something. I am working on a baseball novel, and I was reading a lot of Facebook groups about baseball and trying to get into the spirit of things because I've been working on this book for many, many years, and I wanted to kind of like rejuvenate my interest in it. And I saw an excerpt from one of his books that he had posted. And it was very good. It was the little, I don't know if you remember from the first, I think it's the first book, he talks about meeting, being at Yankee Stadium and meeting Thurman Munson under the stands, just sort of hanging out, waiting to see if the game was going to be canceled because of rain, and he was chatting with him. It was a nice little vignette. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. And I kind of remember his name because
it symbolizes Mark himself because he was so outgoing and communicative that when you got to know him either virtually or in person, you could see that he was a special guy. So I understand your taking to him and his project and your project.
Yeah, he was very open and outgoing and very articulate. And we, anyway, so I bought his books. I remembered his name because in the 70s I was a huge Met fan as a young kid. And I would see all the games, and I liked the Cardinals at that time because they had, cool uniforms. And they also had some interesting characters, So
The birds on the back, they
yeah,
called them.
they were just beautiful. And so
Yes.
so they were like one of the Cardinals and the Pirates were my two favorite enemy teams that I would go to see at Shea because, they were also really cool at that point in the 70s. So I vaguely remembered his name, and I thought, is this Mark Littell, the pitcher? And it turned out, yes, it was Mark Littell, the pitcher. And I thought I would message him and say, gee, you should write a book. And then I thought, well, maybe I should look up and see if he has written a book. And in fact, he had written 3 books at that point, and published them. So I struck up a conversation with him, and he was just really very friendly, outgoing, and he was very interested in writing. I was just shocked to find that this ex-baseball player was interested in writing, so we had quite a lot to talk about with that.
Beautiful. What got you started in writing itself?
Oh, I just, we didn't have TV for many years when I was growing up, and the only thing we had were books. So I just read a lot. I think that's where you generally start. But the funny thing about Mark was that he wasn't a big reader as a kid. He had very bad ADHD, he explained to me, but of course they didn't know what that was at the time. And so he didn't do very well in school, and he didn't read very much at all until I guess maybe I don't even know how old, maybe he's in his 50s. He got diagnosed with ADHD and started taking the right medication. And then he said everything sort of started to become clear to him, and he started to read more, and he really got interested in reading books. And so that's where that all started.
When we were kids, they would call it a daydreamer.
Right.
And I had that, and they told me what it was and what it was about, but I wasn't paying attention to what they said. Anyway, I helped you digress.
Oh, well, he had a story about that in one of his books where he talked about how when he was in school, he would just stare at the fan going around in the ceiling. He just kind of stare at the fan. So, he just zoned out. So, I mean, he and in fact, people that I talked to later who played with him in the minors and in the majors too, said they were just shocked to find that he had written a book, because they thought he would be the last person to write a book, because he had this image of being kind of a slow country hick kind of guy, and because he
wasn't at all.
No, he wasn't. He was very. I guess he kind of slid under the radar, I think, for a lot of people, because he just wasn't very. He kind of stayed in the background, I think, from what I gathered from other people who played with him, that he was kind of quiet and he didn't really put himself out there that much, so that.
He was, except when he was in his true element, which was coaching on the minor league level, where I met him in Stockton, California, back in the 80s. I got to know him immediately. I get to know people by, can they make eye contact? Can they look at you when you talk? Or are they always looking away for somebody else to talk to? Do I want to talk? And he was not that way at all. He had a firm handshake, and he asked as many questions about me as I asked about him in our general conversation. So he was what I call a human being. And that says it all for me. If a guy or a woman can communicate clearly, it helps an awful lot in life.
Well, luckily he was a good listener, which is kind of rare, I guess. I don't know if he was always like that, but because I didn't know him until like close to the end of his life, but he was a very good listener, and he would draw you out, asking questions and asking, more about what you wanted to communicate. And that was pretty cool, I thought. Oh, by the way, here's the book.
Yay!
I'm in it. Or
You have a
Paul's
chapter.
in
Did you get
it.
your copy?
I'm sorry, I did not hear.
I know, I'm kidding about Paul, but I'm flattered. I had no idea. I got the copy, and I just haven't opened the book.
You didn't even
yet.
read your section.
No, I want to find out from you what the book is about without my getting the impression of the book first. I want to ask questions that someone who's considering buying the book might ask. And so I will say, at what point did the book leave off where Mark was writing it? And how did you make the segue or whatever? Or how did you handle that?
Well, he had been collecting pieces for a while, I think, and so the first part of the book is sort of miscellaneous pieces about his youth, growing up in the boot heel and playing baseball, and so that's like one section, and then it kind of goes into his experience playing in the winter ball in Puerto Rico when he was with the Royals, and he was young then, and he took up the opportunity to play in winter ball and practice, with everybody else. He was with Dennis Leonard and all these other folks. And so he wanted to write the book about that primarily. So he wrote several pieces about that experience, his, going to Puerto Rico and exploring and having adventures. And then part of that was when he was near the tail end of his time in Puerto Rico, he realized that his arm was starting to hurt. And so he thought, well, this is really, what do I do now? So the last couple of pieces that he worked on were about him coming to terms with the fact that he had this arm injury and trying to communicate to the Royals, who at the time were not all that, because this was the 70s, they didn't have a lot of imagery and all this kind of stuff. So they were like, oh, it's all in your head, and it wasn't in his head. And so he had an operation.
Rub a little dirt on it, and it'll be fine.
That's what they used to do. And so it starts off rather carefree and fun, and it gets more serious towards the end. And he wrote the last couple of pieces when he was having a real hard time with his health in the last part of that year of 2022. But he kept plugging away, and he worked really hard on getting these two pieces together, 2 or 3 pieces.
He was not a complainer.
No, he wasn't. And, he was always really upbeat on the phone with me and in messages and everything. But every once in a while, I just had the feeling that he was really in a bad way, and then he would recover and he would just be back to his normal self. He always, always was really fun and made me laugh, and we just had a really good time. But so he really wanted to get this section done. So he got that done, and he finished another piece at the end, which was basically about him being out in North Dakota and seeing these wild horses on the top of a hill, I guess, like a ridge. It's a very beautiful little piece. And so anyway, he had finished most of those. He'd gotten those things pretty much together. He had another piece he was working on about Cuba, which he never really finished. I had another, because he took a group of young college kids down to Cuba in recent years with another fellow to give them a tour of Cuba and have them play with the Cuban national team and all this stuff. And it turned out to be rather a mess and kind of an adventure. So he was into like telling that story, but he never really finished that. So I got the gentleman who went with him, whose name is Bill Franciscus, I got him to tell the story instead. So anyway, so he had this, he wanted to write a few more stories about the miners, about his experiences in the miners, and he never got around to doing them. He just like sketched those out. So the book itself, the manuscript was probably like 3/4 of the way done when he passed away. So, and I felt that it really needed to be finished because he worked so hard on it. So I spoke to Sana, his wife, and she agreed to let me go ahead and edit it together. And I suggested that since it wasn't a full book length, it was close to, but not quite. I thought that I would talk to some of his former teammates and friends about him and get some stories from their perspective. And so I started to collect these stories, and that took quite a while, getting in touch with all these people.
Well, I'm primarily concerned with someone who might have contributed, and I know did. His name was Whitey Herzog.
Oh, yeah.
And Whitey Herzog, back in the 60s, when he was a coach with the Mets, lived in the same building and right across from Shea Stadium with Whitey Herzog. And they had a swimming pool, indoor swimming pool.
Wow.
It was tremendous.
That's pretty exotic for that time.
Yeah, my Uncle Harold befriended him. He was a friendly guy. And I got to meet him a whole bunch of times. I think I was already in the Air Force when I'd come home on leave and meet him. He would have made a great, not that Gil Hodges didn't, as it turns out. He would have been a great manager for the Mets. Tremendous baseball insight, and had the advantage of when he was growing up as a baseball player, as a pro baseball player, he played for Casey Stengel. He was a Yankee farmhand at the time, and he learned the process of having an instructional league and the advantage. And he took that with him. The Yankees went for a long time and used that instructional league to their advantage for many years. And I remember him when I was a kid, a real kid, not like this guy, a kid, but he played with Washington, and I remember him on a baseball card with Washington. Images are so important. And since you did that interview with him, or he passed away. Everybody, and I'm not saying people at my age, I shouldn't be shocked. Friends, relatives dying and stuff. And it really gets difficult. Mark was one of the first in a long line of recent people who have passed away or are dying. And I have a theory. COVID, brought on by the real effects of it, brought on by President Trump, number one, President Trump. Actually, you should say number two, because he's number two. But caused COVID to not be treated. And even people that don't show symptoms and what have it, I mean, their bodies are weakened. I see that all the time. Just growing older myself and watching people, and nothing is said about it. nothing is said about the literally hundreds of thousands of people that died that could have been saved, that went on ventilators and died with and piled up. You're a New Yorker, I'm from Queens. They had hospitals, the morgues that were lined up with bodies in them. Just they were mobile morgues, and what a disgrace! What a disgrace to America! What a disgrace it still is having that son of a bitch threaten us to take away. I'm older than you. I earned, and I'm using that in quotations, I didn't really earn any of that money. I just worked for it and I didn't work hard. But yeah, it's money that I have coming in. He's threatening to take away money. And now I don't consider myself elderly. I'm old, but you know, I can do things. But how about the people who literally wheels on wheels are affected? And it's not just old people. This son of a bitch cancels education at Harvard. Grants come to mind. How about research for cancer for kids? Bongo, it's going. How can the Republicans justify that the ones that stand behind, they are all corrupt son of a bitches themselves. He couldn't go along. Hitler couldn't go along with just being Hitler. He had to have Goebbels, he had to have press, he had to have Nazis, police, bringing people in. This guy is destroying our country. Again, I digress.
I'm gonna bring it back. I'm gonna bring it back in. But you're right. I mean, I get it. And this is, by the way, we're speaking. Go ahead.
I'm doing a podcast. I'm just rambling.
Well, no, and so let me speak for maybe you and most of America. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, folks. We're all suffering in one way or another, and it's the byproduct of a lot of what's happening in our government. And so we can't even have a nice conversation about baseball without politics. Politics creeping in. I grew up, I was a product of the 60s, child of the 70s. I remember when it was bad form to talk about religion or politics, especially at the dinner table or around.
Kennedy was Catholic, and that was a big thing. And you mentioned the years. How about if you transcended the 60s to the 70s, you lived through major assassinations. Kennedy, Martin Luther King,
Yeah, I think somebody said it really well once. They said if you preach love and unity, then you're usually met with an assassin's bullet. And it was like you said, it was even John Lennon. All we need is love, you know. And so no, I get it. And so here we are. Fast forward, we can't even have a conversation about baseball, and then or a book, and then all of a sudden politics creeps in because it's seeping into everything. Like I said, we didn't talk about religion. We didn't talk about politics, especially around the dinner table or around Thanksgiving or whatever. But now it's literally eroding us at the bedrock of our foundation in this country. And so I get it. And how could you talk about the national pastime without talking about our nation? But just to bring it back and hopefully bring it back in, we're speaking with H.R. Ryan, author of the Mark Littell book. Now, Mark, that was his last book. He actually had, and he hadn't finished that. But you had mentioned his injury and his pain. he had his injury and his pain. He actually had to retire in the mid-season of 1982 because of bone spurs in his arm that hurt so bad. And then you were also talking about how he took the college kids. Which country was it, HR? I'm sorry.
He took them to Cuba.
Right, and so he took them.
He went a couple more times after that one incident that he wanted to write about. But.
You're right, and it looks like, he did that. It's because he coached in the minors after his career. He also coached college baseball for a while, and that's where he took those kids down there, I'm guessing. And so
I think it was after that, but yeah, and also I discovered that he wrote about it in his third book. He spent a lot of time in Australia teaching them baseball down there.
Right.
And I think he spent like 2 or 3 years there in the off season because they have different seasons. So he would be coaching here in the summer and then he'd go down there for the winter. But that was a really important thing for him also. And so he wrote about that in his book, What's Up, Ramrod, which is about it was his third book. It's about his experiences in Australia and then also his experiences as a minor league coach, which is really very entertaining. He tells some really funny stories in that one.
I guess my homework was incomplete. So I had.
Well, it's kind of complicated, so I'm just discovering all those little bits and pieces myself.
Well, it's funny because it shows that his first book was in 2017 on the 8th day God made baseball.
Right.
And then in 2018, it's What's Up, Ramrod. And then in 2021, Country Boy.
Well, it should be the opposite around, but anyway, so his first book that he published was on the 8th day, which is about his whole Major League Baseball career and how he got into that, and it covers the the home run in the playoffs and all that. So, but he told me that he had written that second. The first book he had written was the middle book, which is Country Boy, which was his memoir of growing up in the Blue Hill in this really rural farm environment.
Right.
And it doesn't have baseball in it at all. But he wrote this book, and then he showed it to people, I guess, and they said, well, what people really want to see, they want to hear the baseball stories, so why don't you talk about your baseball career? So he put that first book aside and wrote the On the 8th Day. And then subsequent to that published Country Boy, and then he put together this third book, which is all the memoirs of his minor league career in Australia. So he had this his ADHD had been under control for a while, but he still had this kind of very what do you want to call it? Impressionistic way of telling stories. Like he would jump around and he would tell stories from different perspectives, and so it was non-linear basically. So that was an issue in the third book because he wanted to tell all these different stories from different parts of his life, and so it was a really kind of. It's a wild ride.
I think I can relate a little bit. I'm a stand-up comedian with no linear format. You should be able to, especially telling a story. I'm always that guy that goes, oh wait, you're not laughing. Oh wait, I forgot to tell you this little tidbit, which happens to be instrumental in telling the story. Oh, you should have been there. It was funny at the time. And so, and that's how it is. But he was definitely, he sounds like he was very animated. He was definitely, one of his nicknames was, like you said, Ramrod, but it's also one of his nicknames was Country. Because he was the down-home boy, right? And so he could probably spin a yarn or heard a couple told in his day. And so he was probably all over the bases, if you know what I mean. And so
he was a very good storyteller. Actually, I wanted to talk about his nicknames because you were talking about Whitey Herzog, and Whitey called him Airhead.
Okay.
Because
why did he call him Airhead? I want to know.
Because I think what happened was the way he described it was that Mark was deaf in one ear, and apparently that made it difficult to talk to him sometimes, and people would talk to him and think that he wasn't processing what they said, so they sort of perceived him as being silly, Airhead. But so he just started calling him Airhead when he was in the bullpen for the Royals, I guess. And so that stuck. So they called him Air or Airhead, and then later, I think the country started even when he was in the minors. I think that was an early one. But yeah, so he had a lot of nicknames. But I want to say about Whitey. He was very ill when I spoke to him, and his secretary or his assistant explained to me, oh well, he isn't doing interviews anymore, but he said for Mark Littell he will do one. So I said,
wow.
Okay, cool. And then she said, he probably only give you like 15 minutes. I said, that's fine, I just wanted to, talk to him a little bit. He talked for over an hour. He just went on and on and on and told all these great stories about Mark. So that was really very gratifying to me to be able to talk to him, because I had admired him for a long time. And he was very close to Mark and really enjoyed him as a person, and they both got along with each other very well. But anyway, so I just wanted to get that little tidbit in there about Whitey, about how he was really kind of on his last legs, I think, when I talked to him, but he managed to communicate what he wanted to communicate about Mark. So, and he was very sharp too. I sent him I sent everybody the draft to make sure that I got everything correctly. Some people actually wrote theirs, but most of the time I would just interview them and write it up as a draft, and then I would send it to them, and they would make changes or whatever. So he called me and he wanted to get like some little detail right about the height of one of the outfielders in the playoff game. So, but he was really sharp. He knew what he was doing, even while he was quite ill and elderly. But yeah, he was a great character, really great baseball guy. He did say something.
Mark himself, who was a veteran advocate, I can't tell you, maybe you already know, how much time and or money, I don't know about the money part, but the raising of money, he was good at that for the veterans. He spent an inordinate amount of time. His father was a Korean War veteran who was severely injured in the war. And he took it to heart. Again, we're talking human beings. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, he was very serious about that, and he told me some stories about that. And I spoke to Robert Wake, who runs the foundation that helps the veterans that he used to work with. And there are a couple of pictures in the book of him visiting veterans in the hospital. And he said he would just really enjoy talking to these people and sharing. They were just so thrilled to have an actual baseball player come and visit them, and then he would schmooze with them and tell them stories and entertain them. And so
how many weekends, because he did a lot of podcasts with me on my network. So if anybody wants to go to YouTube, put in Comfortably Zoned, and which is the channel we have, we've got about 3,200 plus episodes with all kinds of folks. And Mark gave us at least 4 or 5 really heavy interviews. So go see that. Keep in mind when you're thinking about him that you and I haven't discussed money at all. He wasn't, how much he made, this, that, the other thing. He wasn't interested in enriching himself particularly, which is nice to see in a semi-modern day baseball player. Remember, when he played, the players weren't making the money that they are today. And I think that has to keep any human being grounded. If you live in a gated community and you don't see people for years on end because of your wealth, changes you. And
Yeah. There are,
and just a little more blabber. Paulie, I'm tired of hearing my voice.
But I was gonna say, go ahead, HR.
I was just gonna say that he did talk about, actually his friend Jim Wolford told me about how they would chat on the phone a lot. They had played together in the Royals and still kept in touch over the years and were very good friends. And he said that he'd often say to Mark, Mark, we played at the best possible time because we were actually getting some money because Marvin Miller had done great work with the union and managed to get like some money coming in. It wasn't the multi-million-dollar contracts that they have nowadays, but it was better than it was shortly before that. But they still played in the old-fashioned way. They had everything. They were all very old school guys, and so they would get on the phone together apparently and talk about old school stuff and how the kids today don't know how to play. And it's really funny. But
every generation has that.
Right, but I think in their case it was true. I think they really did. They just played like all the time. And like Wilfred said something about how nowadays the young guys are on their video games and playing all this. Like they're not. They don't obsess about it the way that we used to obsess about it. He said, just like playing baseball all the time, like as much as possible. And so you learn from that. And he would complain about how they don't know how to hit cutoff man anymore. All these sort of like basic things that these guys learned over so many hours and hours and hours of practicing it that they just did in their sleep basically. But anyway, so I'm kind of an old school person myself. I like the old school style of baseball. I don't really like the new stuff, but.
Well, let me ask you this. Here's a silly question because I was thinking about it. One of the things I do know about Mark Littell is he's not even just a storyteller and a great relief pitcher, but he's an inventor.
Nutty Buddy.
The Nutty Buddy. Exactly, the Nutty Buddy. And so, is there any mention of the Nutty Buddy in the book at all?
Yes, there is quite a lot actually, because he also used to talk to me about it a lot. He'd say, "Did you see this ad? Did you?" Because he would do these ads, I guess.
Right. And see if I can pull one up really quick
with a baseball machine, a pitching machine, and.
Let me see if I can pull one of these up. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Nutty Buddy, Mark Littell. Nutty Buddy, Mark Littell.
And so he made several of these, and his friend Mike Borland has a great piece in the book where he and Mark went to the Bonneville Salt Flats. I don't know, did Mark ever talk to you about going racing his
Here, let me see if I can do it again just a second, guys. I'm sorry. Hold on a second, guys. Hold on a second, please. Nutty Buddy, Mark Littell. All right, so here we go. I think this is it.
Here on Sports Science, we've done extensive research studying the devastating effects of the low blow.
Beta.
But we've never tested the instrument that's supposed to protect the family jewels.
60 ways to break your nuts.
John, let's have some fun.
You're awfully cocky for a man who's about to get hit.
So anyway, this protector is apparently, the state-of-the-art thing, which is actually fairly expensive. But it apparently is the best one, and umpires use it, and hockey players use it, and oddly enough, baseball players don't use it as much as other people in other sports. It's kind of weird. That's my
Conservative people are.
Wow.
Yeah, I said to Mark.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah. He was very happy with these ads.
Wow. Look at that. That's incredible. I'm sorry. That's a baseball going at you full speed.
Like 80 miles an hour or whatever. Yeah, I said, why don't they wear protectors? And he says, because they're dumb. He said, baseball players are the dumbest people. I don't know if he ever said that to you in your interviews, but he was very honest about this kind of thing. But anyway, so it's still, you can buy them. It's a viable concern. But yeah, he described it. I think it's in the third book he talks about how he invented it. Because he was working with the minor leaguers, and they were talking, he was telling them at some point about like why you have to wear a cup, and they're just like, no, whatever. And he said, oh, it's not very comfortable and all this stuff. And so he decided to make one that was more comfortable and was like custom fit and all this stuff. So he was kind of, I guess he was good with his hands. He liked to build things. He liked to make things out of wood and carve stuff. So he went into the garage or something and got, I think he got 2 golf balls and some sort of tubing thing and started to like monkey around with it. Anyway, it's a very funny story that he tells. And then he actually got these manufacturing people, technical people to do mock-ups and to create the actual prototype. And he did all his research. He was very intense about stuff like that, I guess. So. But yeah, he was a project guy. He was. I was talking to Susanna this the other day, and I was saying that he would have been a great idea guy. Like they had on Madison Avenue in the 50s, the ad agencies who would just like throw out these great ideas, and people would seize upon them, and then someone else would go and actually make the ads. But he was very much an idea guy. He was always churning through these ideas.
Right. Now, you kind of picked it up and finished it off for Mark, but I'm guessing as an author, you're constantly got your hands in the mix and that you're working on your next project. What's happening with you now?
Well, right now, the book just came out, so I've been kind of like trying to make sure that everyone gets a copy.
Sure, absolutely.
Now I'm going to spend part of the summer finishing my novel, which I have put aside because of all this stuff with Mark's book. But yeah, he was actually very helpful to me with that. Because it's also, the reason I asked him to help me with it was because when I read his books, I realized, well, he's actually kind of similar to the hero of my novel, who was another country boy pitcher, but not from Missouri, he's from Minnesota. Does that ring any bells with you? Met Ben?
Minnesota?
Yeah. He was sort of, anyway, so this hero, left-handed pitcher. I've been working on this thing. Right, kind of inspired by him, right? So anyway, so I was reading his stories, and this voice and everything is very similar to what I had in my head about this character. So that's why I asked him to help me out with it, because I said, you're kind of similar in your personality and everything to this guy. So he actually helped me out quite a bit with technical stuff, in terms of like when certain things happen and schedules, and when you find out that you're invited to spring training and how and all this kind of stuff like that. But he also, I was surprised that he read the first 8,000 words or whatever, and he actually came up with some interesting insights into how to tell the story and the point of view, and I thought, well, that's kind of cool. I didn't really expect that, to get into the artistic side of things. So he was very helpful with that.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
But hopefully, we'll get this finished, but it's one of these things that's I put on the
Hey, fellow
back burner because of all this stuff.
Mets, let's talk, fellow Mets fan, about Jerry Koosman.
Yeah.
Incredibly underrated. Not that Tom Seaver wasn't great, but if you look at the big games in the history of Jerry Koosman in the World Series, whoa, the Koos was terrific. And,
Yeah, he was really great, and he's also, unfortunately, he's a huge. Well, I don't want to get into the politics thing again, but he's like way out there on the right wing spectrum.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is kind of disappointing, but anyway. So yeah, he actually went to jail for like not paying his taxes several years ago. Because he was in this sort of like weird right-wing thing of, like refuse to pay your taxes and libertarian kind of stuff. Anyway, but I digress. Anyway, but he's a very interesting guy and kind of
That'll stick in my head for the rest of my life. But
I know it's sad, really. But he did come to the. I guess there was some story. Maybe you would know better because you've been following the Wilpons and everything a lot longer than I have. I sort of like opted out of following the Mets for a while. But what was the story about how they didn't retire his number until like a couple of years ago for some reason?
I don't know. A lot of that is politics.
Yeah, something was happening. I don't know what the gossip was.
I think there are some teams that have like a wall of great players, excluding no one virtually.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of like pointless. Like you're going to use up numbers. At some point, you're not going to have any numbers left.
Right. Anyway, Paulie, how are we doing with time? We've kept this young woman here 3/4 of the day.
Yeah, that's why I was going to say, I wanted her to show the book again and tell us where we can get it.
Well, you can go on Amazon and it's just search on Mark Littell and you'll find his author page. And actually, I can post it on a comment under your YouTube when you post this. He has an author page on Amazon where you can see all the other books that he wrote. So that would be the easiest way to go.
And then how do we keep up with everything H.R. Ryan? And I'm sorry for the background, Mike.
I haven't thought about that yet. But probably online on Facebook.
There you go, just like your lower thirds there. Thank you very much. Will you come back and visit us again? You were such a joy to hang out with, and I had you waiting like I have people waiting all the time. So it was
really great to meet you and to talk to you again, Ralph. And thanks and do read your part in the book because all I want to say I want to say quickly because you're involved in it. In your piece, you mentioned that when we were talking about how Mark was so agreeable and personable and easy to talk to, you had said that he wasn't a big leaguer. He didn't big league.
He didn't big league yet,
Right.
Which is an expression that if one is around baseball long enough, and I was the Topps rep, the baseball card rep on the West Coast from the 80s to the 90s, I met a lot of big leaguers. And fortunately, I met a bunch of wonderful people. None any more wonderful than Mark Littell, who wrote the foreword on the book that I wrote with George Graham, the great George Graham, was my co-author on this book. It was cut up. There you go, Paulie, the best producer.
I noticed you noticed that. Good.
Put that motherfucker up before I got the words out of my mouth. And there's, if you look at the bottom, Mark Littell, along with Peter Golenbach. And I was happy to have him write did. He said a bunch of nice things about my book, and a lot of people die around you, but few I mourned as much as Mark when he passed away. So thanks for being here. Come back and keep us appraised of your baseball novel.
I sure will.
Let's keep right-wing politics out of it if we possibly can for the first 10 minutes, and then we'll bring it in.
Well, it's funny. Mark was really very much further right than I am. But we somehow managed to not get into fights. Sometimes we would sort of start talking about something, and I'd be like, Mark, I really value our friendship enough that I don't want to talk about this with you right now. Because otherwise we'll be. And he's like, oh, okay, I understand. But yeah, he was very.
Yeah, he was.
He could talk to anybody, and he wasn't that. He had friends who were Democrats and friends who were liberals and friends who were right-wingers.
Absolutely.
So he could get on with a lot of different people. He was actually kind of an advanced character.
There are some people that, by virtue of their being, that one must make excuses for in their head to deal with them sometimes. But it always works out in life. And hey, 57% of the women in this country voted for a guy who took Roe v. Wade and threw it out the window. So what do I know about stupidity? An awful lot, because it's around me all the time. Paulie?
That was a great segue. That was a great segue to get me over on the screen. Oh yeah, you're surrounded by stupidity all the time. I feel the love in this room. I feel the love in this room. I do.
Paulie, you're not a part of that at all. And apparently, HR Ryan, you want to use your first name on the air?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
I wanted to mention too that was an idea that Mark had. He said to me while we were working on my novel and his thing, he just said one day, I think it might be a good idea if you want to write about baseball to write under a male name. And I said, all right. And he said, because I have seen the reactions that male sports fans have to women writers, and a lot of times they just tune them out and they don't pay any attention. So we had a nice conversation about that, and I told him about all the famous women authors who had to write under male pseudonyms, and he had no idea. He never really never.
Sometimes you had to remind Mark that we were in the 20th century, or women's suffrage, the right to vote, all that should at this point, but again, people are human and let's accept that.
Yeah, but you know how baseball is. Baseball is very, I've heard from people in the sports writing world that the women in the sports writing world that it's the most misogynist of all the sports. Which I was kind of shocked to hear. I thought it would be something, like football or something. And they said, no, football is much better than baseball. So just a thought to leave you with. But anyway, so that was the idea that he had. I was kind of shocked that he would even think about that, because I thought it would be this kind of sexist jerk. But he actually he thought about this kind of thing. So.
Hey, we loved having you on. Please come back.
Great. Nice to talk to you.
All right. Nice to talk to you. And Paulie, why don't you take us out?
All right, guys. In true style, thank you, HR Ryan. Check out her book, and she's going to have the link right below us in the YouTube and the Facebook. So definitely go get a copy of that book. Tell her Zig in the Zone sent you. For myself, HR, Zig, and the dog. aces over here. We want to thank you for tuning in every Tuesday from 11 to 1 approximately. We are here. We are in the zone. But we have lots of other original programming and we want you to check it out. So go to Edge Studios Online, wherever you can see a podcast, and you'll find us there. But here's some of the original programming you can find.
Bye.
La festine for
Monday 1 to 3 p.m. Junkyard Rat. Monday 4 to 6 p.m. Ghetto Poet. Tuesdays 11 to 1 p.m. Zig in the Zone. See you on our channel. Edge Studios Online. Keep standing up.